The bridge of the Artemis hummed with activity as Captain Elena Drake leaned over the central holodable, her eyes fixed on the pulsating image of a Thalassic fortress world, a swirling sphere of molten rock and jagged ice. It was surrounded by a network of orbital defenses that bristled with weapons designed to obliterate entire fleets. The planet, codenamed Baron 4, served as the linchpin for the Thalassic supply lines in this sector. Destroying it would be humanity's first major counterstrike in the war. Elena straightened, her jaw tight. Every choice she made here would shape the battle to come and, perhaps, the war itself. Around her, the bridge crew moved with precision, their focus unwavering despite the monumental stakes. Lieutenant Harker, her second-in-command, stood nearby, his sharp features illuminated by the faint glow of the displays. Captain, recon probes confirmed defensive positions, Harker said, his tone clipped. 10 orbital platforms, each armed with long-range plasma cannons and interceptor drones. They've also got a fleet of frigates in high orbit. Elena crossed her arms, considering the layout. What about their blind spots? Any gaps in the platform's coverage? Minimal, but there's a narrow corridor along the planet's magnetic poles. It's risky, but it'll give us a chance to slip past their long-range sensors, Harker replied. Elena nodded slowly. It'll have to do. We can't afford a prolonged engagement, not with our fleet spread so thin. Have the strike teams prepped for infiltration. Once we're through, we'll need boots on the ground to disable their planetary shield generator. Harker hesitated. You're leading the ground team, aren't you? Elena didn't answer right away, her gaze lingering on the holodable. Finally, she said, I won't ask anyone to do what I'm not willing to do myself. Besides, we'll need someone who can improvise when things go wrong. Harker's lips tightened, but he gave a short nod. Understood, Captain. The Artemis and its small battle group slipped into the magnetic corridor hours later, the sleek warships cutting through the void like predators in the deep. The tension on the bridge was palpable as they passed the first line of defenses, the Thalassic platforms unaware of their approach. Maintain radio silence, Elena ordered, her voice low but firm. No one breathes until we're past the last platform. The minutes stretched into what felt like hours. Elena's fingers tapped rhythmically against the edge of the holodable, her mind running through contingencies. She knew the Thalassic weren't invincible, but every engagement against them was a gamble. One wrong move, and the cost would be catastrophic. Finally, the lead ship signaled the all-clear. They were past the orbital defenses, and within striking distance of the planet. Elena exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Harker signaled the fleet. Begin the assault. The silence shattered as the human ships opened fire. Missiles streaked toward the orbital platforms, their contrails glowing against the planet's dark silhouette. Railgun slugs tore through the Thalassic frigates, while swarms of drones launched from both sides, clashing in dazzling bursts of light. The Artemis shuddered as return fire raked its shields, but Elena barely flinched. Her focus was on the tactical display, where the battle unfolded in real time. She saw the Thalassic fleet scrambling to respond, their disciplined maneuvers a stark contrast to humanity's more chaotic, adaptive tactics. Shields holding at 60%, Harker reported. We've taken out 3 platforms, but the remaining ones are concentrating their fire on our destroyers. Redirect the Vanguard and Halcyon to provide cover. Keep the pressure on those platforms, Elena said. She turned to the comm officer. Tell the strike teams to launch. It's time. Moments later, the drop pods deployed, streaking toward the planet like falling stars. Elena was in one of them. Her body braced against the vibrations as the pod tore through the atmosphere. The small compartment was cramped, filled with the muffled sounds of her squad's breathing. 30 seconds to impact, the pilot announced, his voice steady despite the turbulence. Elena glanced at her team. They were a mix of veterans and rookies, their expressions a blend of determination and fear. She didn't bother with a rousing speech. Words wouldn't matter now. Instead, she checked her rifle one last time, the familiar weight grounding her. The pod slammed into the surface with a bone-rattling jolt. The doors blew open, and the team poured out into the chaos. The HFY defenders were already waiting, their plasma weapons lighting up the barren landscape. Elena moved with practiced efficiency, firing short bursts as she advanced. The battle on the ground was a brutal, frantic dance. HFY warriors towered over their human opponents, their strength and speed making them formidable adversaries. But humanity's ingenuity turned the tide. EMP grenades short-circuited the aliens' advanced armor, while adaptive camouflage allowed strike teams to outmaneuver their foes. Elena's squad pushed toward the shield generator, the massive structure looming in the distance like a fortress of steel and energy. The closer they got, the heavier the resistance became. Harker, status on the fleet. Elena asked, her voice strained as she ducked behind cover to reload. We're holding, but the HFY reinforcements are inbound. You've got maybe 10 minutes before things get worse up here, Harker replied. Copy that. We'll make it count. They reached the generator with minutes to spare, but the sight of it made Elena's stomach drop. The structure was surrounded by automated turrets and a battalion of HFY soldiers. Suggestions? One of her squad members asked, panting. Elena studied the battlefield, her mind racing. Then she spotted it, a maintenance shaft partially hidden behind a pile of debris. It was a gamble, but it might work. Split into 2 teams, she ordered. I'll take one group through that shaft and disable the generator from the inside. The rest of you create a diversion. Make it loud. The plan was madness, but it was their only chance. As the diversion team opened fire, drawing the HFY's attention, Elena led her group into the shaft. The confined space was stifling, but they pressed on, emerging into the heart of the generator. Plant the charges, Elena said, covering her squad as they worked. The hum of the generator filled the air, a constant reminder of the stakes. The charges were set just as the HFY burst into the room. Elena's team fought desperately to hold them off, buying precious seconds. Detonators ready, one of her soldiers shouted. Fall back, Elena ordered, her voice cutting through the chaos. They barely made it out before the explosion rocked the ground beneath them. The generator collapsed in on itself, and the planetary shield flickered, then vanished. Above, the fleet seized the opportunity. Human ships poured fire into the now vulnerable planet, delivering a blow the HFY wouldn't soon forget. As the Artemis descended to extract the survivors, Elena stood on the battlefield, her armor scorched and her face smeared with dirt. The mission had cost them dearly, but they'd succeeded. For the first time, humanity had struck back. And as Elena looked up at the burning sky, she knew this was only the beginning. The dimly lit command center aboard the Artemis felt suffocating, the air heavy with tension and exhaustion. Captain Elena Drake stood before the main display, her arms crossed as she stared at the fragmented data stream projected across the screen. The battle for Baron had been a victory, but it had come at a cost that gnawed at her. Dozens of lives lost, ships reduced to debris, and for what? A single, tenuous step forward in a war that seemed designed to consume them all. Elena, Lieutenant Harker said quietly, breaking her reverie. He rarely used her first name, which meant what he was about to say wouldn't be good. We decrypted part of the data core from the generator site. You're going to want to see this. She turned to him, her expression unreadable. What did we find? Instead of answering, Harker transferred the data to the main display. A series of schematics and encrypted files flickered to life, alongside fragments of intercepted communications. The images were disjointed but unmistakable. Massive construction projects, fleets of unidentified ships, and, most troubling of all, coordinates that stretched far beyond HFY-controlled space. Elena's eyes narrowed. What is this? It doesn't look like HFY tech. It's not, Harker confirmed. The encryption doesn't match any of their systems either. Our analysts think this could be the work of a third party, one operating in the shadows. Whoever they are, they've been feeding fuel to this fire for decades. Her stomach churned. A third party? It made sense in a twisted way. The attack on the conference station, the mysterious fleet that had appeared in its aftermath, and now this. It was as if someone had orchestrated every move to pit humanity and the Thalass-K against each other, ensuring mutual destruction. Who benefits from this? Elena asked, her voice tight. What do they stand to gain? Harker shrugged, his frustration evident. Chaos. Power. Take your pick. But whoever they are, they've gone to great lengths to cover their tracks. We're still trying to piece together the bigger picture. Elena turned back to the display, her mind racing. The schematics showed massive structures orbiting a planet at the edge of known space. The coordinates marked a region that humanity had yet to explore, a barren stretch of void deemed uninhabitable. We need to know more, she said finally. If this is what it looks like, we can't afford to ignore it. Harker hesitated. You're not seriously thinking about investigating, are you? We barely survived Baron 4. The fleet's in no shape for another operation. We don't have a choice, Elena replied, her tone leaving no room for argument. If this third party is as dangerous as they seem, then they're the real enemy, not the Thalass-K. We need to find out who they are and what they're planning before it's too late. Harker sighed but nodded. Understood. I'll inform the crew. The journey to the coordinates took days, each hour marked by a growing sense of unease. The farther they ventured, the more desolate the void became. Stars grew faint, and the usual background chatter of civilian transmissions faded into silence. By the time they arrived, the crew was on edge. Elena stood on the bridge as the Artemis emerged from its final jump, the view before them filling the screen. At first glance, there was nothing remarkable. Just another barren system with a lifeless planet orbiting a dim, red star. But as the ship's sensors swept the area, the truth became chillingly clear. Captain, Harker said, his voice low, we're detecting structures in orbit. Massive ones. They're not like anything we've seen before. Elena leaned closer to the display. The structures were vast and alien, their designs jagged and asymmetrical. They bristled with weapons and emitted energy signatures that defied classification. At the center of it all was a colossal station, its surface crawling with activity. Are they aware of us? Elena asked. Not yet, Harker replied. Their systems don't seem to be optimized for stealth detection. But if we get too close... We won't, Elena said. Send out a recon drone. I want eyes on that station. The drone launched silently, its tiny frame slipping through the void undetected. As its feed came online, the bridge crew watched in stunned silence. The station wasn't just a military installation. It was a factory, churning out ships and weapons at an industrial scale that dwarfed anything humanity or the Thalass-K could muster. Dear God, Harker muttered, this isn't just a staging ground. They're building a fleet. And not just for this war, Elena added, her voice grim. They're preparing for something bigger. The drone's camera panned, capturing a series of massive docks where ships were being assembled. Each vessel was sleek and predatory, their hulls adorned with markings that bore no resemblance to Thalass-K symbols. Elena's heart sank as she realized the truth. This third party wasn't just fanning the flames of war. They were preparing to seize the galaxy for themselves once the major powers had torn each other apart. The drone suddenly went dark, its feed cutting out with a sharp burst of static. Elena's stomach twisted. What happened? They've spotted it, Harker said, his hands flying over the console. We've got incoming. Fighters launching from the station. Evasive maneuvers, Elena ordered. Power up the weapons and get us out of here. The Artemis jolted as enemy fire grazed its shields. The alien ships were fast and relentless, their pilots coordinating with precision that bordered on machine-like. Despite the crew's best efforts, it became clear they were outmatched. Shields at 40%, Harker called out. We're not going to last long like this. Elena gritted her teeth. Prepare the jump drive. We need to warn the fleet. It's risky, the navigator said. With these energy distortions, We could end up anywhere. Anywhere is better than here, Elena snapped. Do it? The Artemis shuddered violently as the jump drive engaged, the stars outside stretching into streaks of light. For a moment, it felt like the ship might tear apart under the strain, but then they were through, emerging into the relative safety of open space. Elena slumped back into her chair, her breathing heavy. The crew around her looked shaken but alive. For now, that was enough. We have to tell the Union Council, Harker said, breaking the silence. If we don't act now, it'll be too late. Elena nodded. We will. But we can't rely on them alone. We need allies, Thalassicae or not. Harker raised an eyebrow. You think they'll listen after everything that's happened? They'll have to, Elena said firmly. Because if we don't stand together, none of us will survive what's coming. The bridge fell silent, the weight of her words settling over the crew. For the first time, Elena felt the true scope of the conflict they were facing. This wasn't just a war. It was the beginning of something far worse. Elena Drake stood on the command deck of the Artemis, her knuckles white against the edge of the holotable as the chaos of the final battle unfolded before her. The combined fleet of humanity and the Thalassicae surged against the massive armada of the Shadow faction. Ships clashed in a deadly ballet, their weapons painting the darkness with streaks of energy and fire. It was a fragile, uneasy alliance, but survival had demanded unity. Old grievances had been cast aside for the sake of a greater purpose, to stop the enemy that sought to extinguish them all. Captain, the right flank is collapsing, Lieutenant Harker shouted, his voice rising above the cacophony of alarms. We've lost a vanguard and 2 Thalassicae frigates. Reinforcements are 6 minutes out. Elena's jaw clenched. Every second mattered, and they were running out of time. The enemy's colossal station loomed in the distance, its superweapon charging with a slow, ominous glow. If it fired, the heart of the Allied fleet would be obliterated, and with it, any hope of resistance. Redirect the Halcyon and Eidolon to reinforce the flank, Elena commanded, and tell the Thalassicae dreadnoughts to focus their fire on that superweapon. We can't let it charge to full capacity. Harker hesitated. If we pull those ships off their current targets, the central line might. Do it, Elena snapped, her tone leaving no room for argument. We're past the point of safe choices. The Artemis shuddered as enemy fire slammed into its shields, the deck trembling beneath her feet. Elena didn't flinch. She was too focused on the holotable, her mind racing through possibilities, strategies, gambles. The enemy's coordination was unnerving, their ships moving with precision that bordered on omniscience. It was as though they anticipated every move before it was made. We're being outmaneuvered, Harker said grimly. They're reading us like an open book. Not for long, Elena said, her voice low. Prep the boarding teams. I'm leading the strike myself. Harker turned to her, incredulous. Captain, you can't be serious. The station's defenses are formidable, yes, Elena interrupted. But if we don't take out their command center, this battle is already lost. They're coordinating through that station. Cut off the head, and the body will fall apart. Harker's protest died on his lips. He knew she was right. I'll have the teams ready, he said quietly. Minutes later, Elena stood in the drop bay, clad in reinforced armor and surrounded by her strike team. The rumble of the Artemis weapons echoed through the ship, a grim reminder of the battle raging outside. Elena's pulse was steady, her mind focused. There was no room for doubt, no margin for hesitation. You all know the mission, she said, her voice carrying over the roar of the engines. We get in, we disable their command network, and we get out. This is the turning point, right here, right now. If we fail, there won't be another chance. Her team nodded, their faces resolute. They were soldiers, yes, but they were also human. Fear and determination mingled in their eyes, a fragile balance that Elena understood all too well. The drop pods launched in rapid succession, hurtling through the chaos of the battle toward the enemy station. The ride was violent, the pods buffeted by debris and near misses. When they slammed into the station's hull, the explosive breach was deafening. Elena led the charge into the dark corridors beyond, her rifle raised and her movements precise. The interior of the station was a labyrinth of alien design, its walls pulsing faintly with an eerie, bioluminescent light. The air was heavy, almost oppressive, and the faint hum of the superweapon's charging core reverberated through the structure. The enemy met them head-on, their sleek, armored forms moving with mechanical precision. They fought without emotion, without hesitation. Perfect soldiers for a perfect war. "Push forward," Elena shouted, her voice cutting through the cacophony of gunfire. "We're close to the command hub." Her team moved as one, covering each other and adapting to the enemy's tactics with the ingenuity that had always been humanity's greatest strength. Slowly, painfully, they carved a path to the enemy lines, their losses mounting with every step. When they reached the command hub, the sight that greeted them was both awe-inspiring and horrifying. The central interface was a pulsating mass of organic and mechanical components, its tendrils extending throughout the room like the roots of some ancient, malevolent tree. The figures operating it were grotesque hybrids, their bodies fused with the station's systems in a symbiosis that was as unnatural as it was efficient. "Set the charges," Elena ordered, her voice firm despite the unease twisting in her gut. "We bring this whole thing down." The team moved quickly, placing the explosives at critical points while Elena covered them. The enemy's reinforcements were relentless, pouring into the room in waves. The air was thick with the acrid tang of burning circuits and the screams of the wounded. But Elena held her ground. "Charges set," one of her soldiers called out. "We've got 30 seconds. Fall back," Elena shouted, firing her weapon until her magazine was empty. "Move, move, move." They sprinted down the corridor, the sound of enemy pursuit close behind. The explosion came a moment later, a deafening roar that shook the station to its core. The lights flickered, then dimmed, and the oppressive hum of the superweapon's charge abruptly ceased. On the bridge of the Artemis, Harker watched as the enemy fleet faltered. Their movements became erratic, their coordination unraveling. "It's working," he said, almost disbelieving. "They're falling apart. Finish them." Elena's voice crackled over the comms. "Don't let a single one escape." The combined fleet pressed the advantage, tearing through the enemy's ships with renewed ferocity. The battle ended in a blaze of fire and destruction, the enemy armada reduced to smoldering wreckage. Back aboard the Artemis, Elena stood in the medbay, her armor scorched and her body battered but alive. Around her, the survivors of the strike team tended to their wounds, their expressions a mixture of exhaustion and relief. "We did it," Harker said quietly, stepping up beside her. "The station's destroyed, their fleet's gone. We've won." "For now," Elena replied, her gaze distant. "But this isn't the end. There's more out there, more like them. We've only delayed the inevitable." Harker nodded, understanding the weight of her words. "Then we'll be ready." Elena looked at him, a faint, tired smile tugging at her lips. "We have to be, because the war that never ended is far from over." The conference station hung in the void like a fragile jewel, its translucent walls refracting the light of a nearby blue giant. Inside, the air buzzed with tension as representatives from dozens of species gathered in the grand atrium. Despite the carefully maintained atmosphere of decorum, the room felt like a powder keg waiting for a spark. Among them stood Captain Elena Drake, her sharp gaze sweeping over the crowd. She wasn't here to speak or negotiate. Her role was silent, vigilant, a soldier amidst diplomats. She was a reminder of what failure would bring. Elena shifted her stance, the polished floor beneath her boots a stark contrast to the steel decks she was accustomed to. She hated events like these, artifice wrapped in hope. Still, the stakes couldn't have been higher. The Thalassicae hegemony, a species whose age-old dominion spanned half the galaxy, had grudgingly agreed to these peace talks. For humanity, it was a chance to avoid a war they couldn't afford to fight. The Thal-SEK were bigger, stronger, and infinitely more experienced in galactic warfare. But what humanity lacked in raw power, they made up for in determination and ingenuity. That determination now rested on the shoulders of the Terran Union's delegation. From her position near the atrium's edge, Elena's calm earpiece crackled with the calm voice of her second-in-command, Lieutenant Harker. "All clear so far, Captain. Sensors aren't picking up anything unusual. Let's keep it that way," Elena murmured, her voice low. Her hand rested lightly on the holster at her side. She scanned the delegates again, her eyes narrowing slightly as they passed over the Thal-SEK envoy. Clad in shimmering black armor, their leader, Arch-Emissary Kavren, stood motionless, his reptilian gaze fixed on humanity's ambassador. The Thal-SEK always seemed larger in person, their scale forms exuding an air of menace that even diplomacy couldn't mask. Ambassador Juliet Kwan, humanity's chosen voice in these talks, stepped forward to address the assembly. Her words were carefully chosen, weaving a narrative of cooperation, mutual survival, and shared prosperity. But Elena noted the flicker of disdain on Kavren's face. The Thal-SEK had never viewed humans as equals. In their eyes, humanity was an infestation that had spread too quickly and too far. Elena's unease deepened. Something wasn't right. The conference felt too still, as if the galaxy itself were holding its breath. Her fingers brushed the edge of her comm unit. Harker double-checked the station's external sensors. The explosion cut her off. It wasn't a subtle detonation. It was a roar that tore through the station like a physical force, shattering the comm in an instant. Elena was thrown to the floor as the atrium erupted in chaos. Smoke and fire engulfed the space, drowning out the screams of the delegates. Alarms blared, their shrill tones overlapping with the panicked shouts of survivors. Elena forced herself upright, coughing as acrid smoke filled her lungs. Her eyes darted to the source of the blast, a gaping hole where part of the atrium wall had been. Through it, she saw the cold expanse of space, debris and bodies floating into the void. Her training took over. "Harker, report," she barked, tapping her earpiece. "Massive explosion in the atrium, Captain. Scans show multiple breaches across the station. Emergency bulkheads are sealing, but damn it, we've got casualties everywhere." Elena's jaw tightened. She turned her attention back to the room. Kavren was alive, his armored form standing amidst the destruction like a statue. His eyes locked onto her, and in them, she saw a fury that burned hotter than the fires around them. "This is a human attack," Kavren roared, his voice amplified by his suit's comm system. "You speak of peace and then stab us in the back." "That's not true," Kwan shouted, stepping forward despite the chaos. "We had no part in this." "Lies," Kavren snarled. He gestured to his guards, who drew their weapons in unison. "The Thal-SEK will not be deceived again. This war is your doing, and we will see it ended." Elena moved instinctively, positioning herself between the Thal-SEK and Kwan. Her pistol was in her hand before she realized she'd drawn it. "Arch-Emissary, stand down," she commanded, her voice sharp. "No one's shooting anyone here." Kavren ignored her, his focus on Kwan. "You think we don't recognize your methods? This attack bears your mark, crude, reckless, and full of cowardice." Elena's calm crackled again, Harker's voice cutting through the noise. "Captain, you need to see this. External sensors are picking up a fleet. Unidentified ships closing fast. They're jamming most of our systems." Elena's blood ran cold. "Can you identify them?" "Not yet, but they're not ours, and they're not Thal-SEK. Whoever they are, they're here to finish the job." Elena's mind raced. This wasn't just an accident or a failed sabotage. It was a calculated move to ignite a war. She turned to Kwan. "Ambassador, we need to get you and the other delegates out of here. Now." Kwan nodded, her face pale but resolute. "Do what you must, Captain." Elena activated her comm again. "Harker, prep the shuttles. We're evacuating." Kavren stepped forward, his towering presence casting a shadow over Elena. You think you can escape justice? You think you can flee from what you've done? Elena met his gaze, unflinching. Arch-emissary, if we don't leave this station, none of us are going to survive. Your fight isn't with us. It's with whoever's coming. For a moment, Kavren didn't respond. Then, slowly, he lowered his weapon. If this is a trick, human, I will see your species erased. It's not, Elena said firmly. Now move. As the Thalassicae and human delegations hurried to evacuate, Elena couldn't shake the feeling that the explosion was only the beginning. The war she'd feared had arrived. Not with a declaration, but with a single, devastating act of betrayal. And as she led the survivors toward the waiting shuttles, she couldn't help but wonder if humanity had already lost. Behind her, the station groaned under the strain of its wounds, and the stars beyond seemed to darken, as if heralding the long night to come.